Now we are into the third seminar on Megiddo. So again, it's a very different story altogether. I think the genre is very different from the first two that I gave today. And I must say that Megiddo is very central in my research, but not only, of course. I do all sorts of things. And I struggle with the two opposites. The struggle. First of all, I am completely fed up with the heat in the summer at Megiddo and all this organization. I'm fed up with that completely. On the other hand, Megiddo has the power of accumulation of data, amazing power. So we can do today things that I could not have dreamt about before, because simply of the way that we are working and the accumulation of data. So the struggle is how long to continue there, I think. So meanwhile, I'm here, I'm there. You will see even breaking news in the presentation from the summer of 2018. I will certainly be there next season in 2020, and then we'll see. So we are speaking today about comments on Iron Age Megiddo with implications for the history of the Northern Kingdom. You know, there's so much to say about Megiddo, it's endless, so even for the Iron Age it's too much, so I prepared too much, there's no question about it, and I will have probably to break somewhere in the middle. And wherever we reach, so you get a notion of what I'm doing at Megiddo. It's okay, never mind if we didn't get all the way down, if we don't get all the way down to the end. Okay, so just to remind you, this is a nice picture, by the way, looking at Megiddo to the south, southeast, and seeing one of the iconic monuments of Megiddo over here. This is over here, one of the two palaces of the Iron 2A at Megiddo that had been presented in the beginning as belonging to Solomonic palaces, and they date to the 9th century. We'll speak about it. So just to remind you the history of excavations at Megiddo. Megiddo has been excavated for many years. I mean, starting 115 years ago, with the expedition led by Gottlieb Schumacher, a German expedition in the beginning of the 20th century, then the University of Chicago, then Yigael Yadin, and then us. And we are there starting in 1994, so it has been a long time. Although, when people tell me, wow, such a long time, my answer is not at all. Why am I saying this? Because we are working every second year. So we were in the field for the 13th season only, in the summer of 2018. And also the seasons are relatively short, 6-7 weeks. Whereas, for instance, at Ashkelon, they worked for 25 years, every season like 2 months, and at least, if not 3. So if you calculate altogether the number of weeks in the field, we are not at the peak for sure. But we are getting a lot of information from this side. So just to remind you about the main Iron Age monuments that had been unearthed in the past at Megiddo. There are many of them. These monuments had not been excavated by us, but by our predecessors. For instance, you see on the right-hand side, the right up, one of the famous Megiddo gates. This is the quote-unquote Solomonic Gate at Megiddo. And then we'll speak about it later, because we excavated in the vicinity of this monument this season with very interesting results. Below you can see the Megiddo stables, the famous Megiddo stables, and then another palace at the bottom, and so on and so forth. So many monuments at the site. Now we, after 24 years of project and 13 seasons in the field, we have managed to really excavate many places at the site, and we are well covered, so to speak, when we look at the different areas of the tail of the mound. So what I'm showing you now in all our areas altogether, and in blue and yellow areas which yielded Iron Age remains. So we have a very well coverage of the site for both the Bronze Age and even more so for the Iron Age. And the Iron Age is essential. I must tell you a little bit of personal experience. This summer we were in the site, in the field, and we worked in 5 areas basically. And in 3 of them I am deep in the middle bones. And the middle bones, with all due respect, okay, fine, it's interesting, but it's not my shtick, if I can say so. It's not really, so I can enjoy writing something on the middle bones, but it's not central to my research. So it was a little bit difficult for me that I don't have enough Iron Age or late bones. And thereby, I have already started surveying the situation for next season to have more Iron Age. There are still questions that need to be answered. Now, this is very important that I wish to, this is something, maybe this is the most important message of the lecture, what I'm going to tell you now. I'm going to speak about the uniqueness of Megiddo. Now I can say, well, I said it also 24 years ago, but now I can certainly say there's no site like this. There's no site like this. All these stories about, all those tales, these are good stories. All of them are important. All of them are nice. All of them can give us wonderful information. Lachish and Beersheba and I don't know what, Rehov and Azekah and so on, and Ashkelon and so on. But at Megiddo there is a combination of factors that make it, unique. First and foremost, first of all, the exposure of the monuments, and the accumulation of data from so many excavations. But not only that, and this is something that I wish to emphasize on the background of this picture. Uniqueness of Megiddo. Control over stratigraphy. Axel, this is 5-6 meters below you. Now, Axel was area supervisor here when we were 5 meters up. You can see maybe his sandals still over here at the top. So, uniqueness, good control over stratigraphy. I think that we are a good team also, with good archaeologists. I'm speaking now about, some of my partners, Mario Martin, Matt Adams, now, and others, the younger people who are really, Asaf Kleiman, my student, Zach Danset and others, who are very strong in the field. The strongest possible, in my opinion, from the point of view of abilities in the field. And then very strong control over relative chronology, meaning ceramic assemblages, ceramic typology. There's no site like this. Also from the point of view of assemblages, because it was kind of destroyed so many times, devastated, the assemblages are big. This is the type site for all those periods that I'm speaking about. And then the bombardment of radiocarbon determinations. There's no site like this anywhere in the Levant, and I doubt very much in the ancient Near East. You will see in a minute the coverage of radiocarbon that we are dealing with. So for instance, this is a picture from the Bronze Age, not the Iron Age, but it shows you what I'm speaking about. Look at it from the top, H9, and with the floors, I'm speaking about floors, H9, late Iron 1. But well, something went wrong here with the screen, but never mind, the levels are not in the right place, or most of them are not, but some of them do. So you can see the floors one on top of the other. Why is this important? Because usually when we deal with archaeology, and I'm asking questions, let's say about faunal assemblage of animal assemblage bones for a site. So they tell me, well, let's say Lachish at the late Bronze Age or Lachish in the Iron Age, because they piled everything together. The fact that we are able to deal with minute differences of subphases like here, of late Bronze, of Middle Bronze 3, late Bronze 1A, late Bronze 1B, late Bronze 2A and 2B and 3 and so on, early and late Iron 1, and differentiate between the assemblages of material culture gives us a huge power when we come to understand processes in material culture and history. This is the power of this site, which now I acknowledge more and more after so many years of excavations. Just look at this thing. This is amazing. This we prepared now because Mario and Eliezer Pisetsky and me are writing now a piece on radiocarbon dating the late bones at Megiddo and Bet Shean. So look on the right-hand side. Altogether, for the late bones, so far, from the southern Levant, there are 168 samples, accumulation. 168. At Megiddo, we have 88. 88 of the 168 come from Megiddo. It's unbelievable. One site produced about 55% of all the samples assembled so far. And the same goes for the Iron Age. Now look on the left-hand side, all the red is radiocarbon dated. Fully radiocarbon dated with hundreds of samples. I don't want to tell you how much it costs. This is devastating. But it gives a special power to the site. You will see later in a few examples. Okay. So having said that, I wish to speak today about several topics. You see 5 topics on the screen now. The destruction of the late Bronze Age city, the end, I would say the end, maybe better than destruction of the late Bronze Age city. The late Iron One, observations on the Omrites, observations on the Nimshites, and Assyria and beyond. I am almost sure that we will not get to Assyria. But hopefully we will be able to get to the Nimshites, we will see. But wherever we go, whatever we achieve is good for us, right? Okay. So I start with the question of which is important for the Iron Age. What exactly happened at the end of the late Bronze Age? How did it end? How did the site deteriorate? Can we, with the power of Megiddo, of being able to engage with minute differences in material culture, can we put on the table things that are not being observed in other sites? So this is the question to start with. So open questions. Date of destruction of Megiddo. You know, the usual wisdom, conventional wisdom, is that the site was destroyed in the time of Ramesses VI. Why? Because an object from the days of Ramesses VI, this is a base of a statue of this Egyptian monarch of the 20th dynasty, was found at Megiddo in circumstances which are not very clear, but supposedly belonging to the last late bronze layer at Megiddo. And then, in relation, there's the big question of the Philistine pottery. You know, the whole debate regarding Philistine pottery started in a way at Megiddo regarding the question whether Philistine pottery appears in the end phase of Egyptian rule over the site or after. You know, when Trude Dotan, the late Trude Dotan, published her seminal work on the Philistine pottery, I think the English book is from 1982, she was of the opinion that the last late bronze layer at Megiddo, what I call late bronze, at least the layer which is associated with Ramesses III, one way or the other, has Philistine pottery. And then came others, the younger generation, Abichai Mazar and others, and said no, she was mistaken, Philistine pottery appears later. So these are just 2 examples of questions that can be asked at Megiddo and answered at Megiddo with implications regarding the entire country. Please remember that because of the power of the site, the implications are enormous. And this is the uniqueness of the place, that whatever I do at Megiddo has, you know, is connected to broader areas than the site itself and relates to broader questions and broader historical problems. Okay, so let's take a look at Megiddo and see what's going on there. So Megiddo results until 2012. You can already understand that something happened in 2012 that changed our mind regarding the site, regarding this question of end of the late Bronze Age. So until 2012, we managed to excavate the end of the late bronze in one place, in area K, which is in the south. I'll show you where it is. I will be speaking about 2 main areas now. So let me show you. One of them, K, is here. Okay, we are basically looking north now, and the other one is here, H. And I will be speaking also about the palace which had been excavated by the University of Chicago here. So, in area K, we excavated a layer, K6, which we identified as belonging to the late Bronze tree. How do we know that? According to the pottery. because it was very simple. Below the iron 1 layer, and then we saw also that it is above. In the sequence, we understood the sequence well. This is before radiocarbon in the beginning. I mean, we had already radiocarbon dating at that time, but without engaging into radiocarbon right now. So this is the last late bonds layer at Megiddo. And when we looked at the material culture of this layer, we noticed that it's typical late bonds, and you can see here two pictures, which gives you a notion of how it looks like. Comma, it is very clear that there is no Philistine material here whatsoever. We expose this area in a meaningful exposure, of like 15 or 20 meters or so. Lots of pottery, lots of material. Not even one Philistine shell in this layer of the late bonds. So everything was normal and we were happy. All the frogs were happy in the pond, and it's always like that. Things go as they need to go until they don't, and then all of a sudden you have commotion. So this was until 2012. Then in 2012 we managed to reach the late bonds, or the iron 1 and late bonds, in area H. This is the area that Axel directed. I think it was 98 or 2000. When was it? 2000, yes, many years ago. And this area is interesting because it is located near the late bonds, the area of the late bonds palaces that had been excavated by the University of Chicago. So it was very tempting to try to make the link between the palaces nearby. I mean, we are in a distance of 10 meters away, or 15 meters from the late bonds palaces here. So we are in the palace compound, in the palace neighborhood, in the elite neighborhood of Megiddo. Now, we know this very well, and in recent years, we have published, this is also something that we could not have done several years ago, and most sites cannot do this. We have published several articles recently comparing results from this area, which is palace related, to area K, which is the backwater of Megiddo, so to speak, the simpler domestic area of the site. And the comparison is very teaching, very interesting, it teaches us a lot. Because, for instance, we compared an article which we published, I don't remember where anymore, I think in the Oxford Journal of Archaeology a few years ago, the animal assemblages, and we see that there is difference between the two areas regarding consumption, supply and consumption of meat, between the more affluent sector of the society and all the schleppers that were living there in the domestic area behind. And we can see this also in different, actually in material culture as well, the differences. So we are here near the palace, which is significant for the discussion that we are going to have in the palaces. What the palaces are no more. They had been completely demolished and removed by the University of Chicago because they wanted to continue their work down. Okay, sorry. So here is the area H, and here is how work in area H continued. You see H9 is iron 1, H10 is iron 1, H11 I described here as early iron 1, H12 is late bonds 3 and early iron 1, H13 is late bonds 2. So between 2008 and 2012, we went all the way down through the iron 1 into the late bonds 2. Now, we were looking for a destruction. Over here, in area K, there is a disturbance. This is why we have a big assemblage of pottery at the end of the late bonds age. In the time, what can I say, before introduction of Philistine pottery. So the question is, what's going on here? And we noticed that there is only one destruction here, all the way down. Of course, there's destruction in H9, but this is late iron 1, 10th century. But if we were looking for a destruction that is related to the end of the Bronze Age city, one way or the other, we needed something below. And there's only one destruction. This is the destruction of H11, which gave us also a huge assemblage of pottery that has now been published by Eran Aryeh, my student. So, only one destruction. So there's no question, this is the destruction. Now, this is related to the palace. So it reflects on the palace. This is the destruction of the area of the palace. Surprise! 2 Philistine vessels in the destruction. How to explain this? 2 Philistine vessels in the destruction. You can see the destruction on the left-hand side top, and you can see on the left-hand side bottom that there is no other destruction when we go down. Because the destruction here in this picture is here, with the floor. And there are no more destructions down, into the late bronze 2 and 2A even. And in this destruction, Philistine pottery. This is surprising. You remember, in Area K there is no Philistine pot, not even one sherd. So is this a matter only of differences of the society? More affluent, less affluent? What's going on here? So I can say also, tell you also that Philistine pottery, in fact, appears already in age 12. So it is even more surprising. So the question was what to do with this. So first of all, we engaged in radiocarbon studies. And what we did was very simple. We developed Bayesian models, statistical models, for the excavation in area K and for the excavation in area H, and both of them are continuous. Why we are doing this? Why we are not looking at a single disruption? Because when you force the stratigraphy, now you listen to me please very carefully. When I force the stratigraphy on the results, I diminish the uncertainties, right? Because a single radiocarbon result can give me an uncertainty of 100 years. This is not good enough. However, if I tell the model that H11 must be on top of H12, don't mess with me, I tell you. This is a must, I am telling you. So then it condenses the results and I get better results, better dates. So let's have a look. This is really interesting. This is the model on the right hand side, top. And in the middle, in the table, please take a look. Between K8 and K7, there is some sort of a disturbance at Megiddo. Why am I saying this? There is a big assemblage of pottery in area K. There is some sort of thing going on. The date is between 1211 and 1161. Then the end of K6, which I showed you before, is between 1136 and 1083, right? Okay. But now look what happens when I look at H11 below. It falls later, between 1073 to 1031. What's the meaning of this? The meaning of this, that what we see in the pottery, we see also in the radiocarbon. That H11 is a destruction, but it is later than K6. And K6 is later than K8. Now tell me if this is possible to achieve in another site, which does not have these minute observations and minute observations on stratigraphy, pottery assemblages, and radiocarbon dates. Forget it, no way. You work in another site, you lump everything together and you get something, I don't know what, a date, which is meaningless in fact. So what's the meaning of all this? What do we see here? That's my question. So here it is, what we see here. Megiddo apparently deteriorated gradually over a period of about a century. There is a disturbance at the end of K8, and also Mario Martin noticed something at the same time in the area of the palace. Then the site recovered, and there is another disturbance at the end of K6, maybe related to the Egyptian withdrawal from the southern Levant, from Canaan. But the final fall of Megiddo came later. It came only at the end of H11 and the palace nearby, which means around 1100 or even maybe a bit later. Look at the date. Even maybe a bit later than 1100. Here, according to this model, it's a little bit later than 1100. What's the meaning again? The meaning is that we see here a site which suffered from the disturbances and the restless situation at the end of the late Bronze Age, but managed to hold, and there were several disruptions, but the final collapse came when the Egyptians were no more, which means that the site of Megiddo managed to survive one way or another several decades after the pull-out of Egypt from the southern Levant. And this is the first time that we see evidence for this anywhere. And this is really, I think, interesting. So this is the first thing that I wanted to present to you. And also, again, you see here the power of radiocarbon dating in the Bayesian models that I'm showing you now. Okay. So the next question is, what's next? What happened after? So now we see the deterioration. Please pay attention to the fact that there is a terminology problem here. That I described the late Bronze Age as ending in K6, but the final blow is coming, in fact, I call it end of late Bronze City, but in fact it happens in the Iron One. So what? I mean, okay, fine. This is what I see. So, apart from this destruction, what else can we say about the Iron One at Megiddo? With the same method of working, especially with the same method regarding dating, which is essential. So let's look at the late Iron One, and the title that I gave it, New Canaan. This is a title which I gave to an article in 2003, and one way or the other, it stuck, it picked up speed, and people now use this title. The title is not good. I should have called it Renewed Canaan, better than New. But New Canaan was a wonderful title because it immediately kind of called attention to things that people know from a small, one way or the other, let's say a small town near Cleveland, Ohio, or something like that. So, okay. What happened after the collapse of the late Bronze Age? So here is the picture of the palace. The palace ended in start. Yes, one more thing that I wish to tell you. The palace ended at the end of Megiddo Stratum 7a. And this means also that Trudelotan was correct regarding the fact that there is Philistine pottery in the destruction layer, but still she was not correct regarding the date in the time of Ramses III. So here you can see how we can really shed light on previous scholars and rehabilitate them on certain things, but then negate them on other items because of our ability to go into minute differences of material culture. So here we are now with the end of the Bronze Age city, if you wish to call it that way. So in the Iron One, first of all, we see a thick accumulation. In area H, this is what I'm showing you now, there are 3 layers, which, if not 4, which can be described as Iron One. H9 is definitely late Iron One, with big destruction at the end. We'll speak about it. H10, H11 is the one which was destroyed in the beginning of the 11th century. And H12 is also partially, at least, Iron One from the point of view of the pottery, of the material culture. Okay? Now, the most interesting for the whole thing is the phenomenon of the late Iron One. Because what happened after the collapse of the palace in the beginning of the 11th century, I cannot tell you whether there was a gap of occupation for a short while or not. Probably the answer is positive, but I cannot tell for sure. But again, a while later, the city recovered. But it recovered as a small thing, as a village or so. But slowly it picked up speed, and then it became a very significant town at the end of the Iron One, which means we don't see destructions between, but we see replacement of smaller buildings with more elaborate ones. And it becomes a major urban center in the late Iron One. Late Iron One, I'm telling you already in advance, dates to late 11th century and first half, if not more, of the 10th century BC. Okay, this is the period. So let's take a look. From every perspective that one can look at, this city resembles the material culture of the second millennium. The whole package of material culture is second millennium-like, which means architecture is second millennium. We face a situation here which is really amazing. We are now, I suppose, 4 meters down, 3.5, 4 meters down. The whole way down, we are in the same kind of architecture. We are now, this is stratum level K6. We are now in K13. Okay? This is later on 1. We are now in mill bones 2. The same architecture of courtyard houses, the same method of construction, the same heritage or the same tradition of architecture continues along the second millennium in a beautiful way that is also amazing to see at this site. So this is about architecture. The pottery is really continuation of the late Bronze Age. If I give a test on this picture to somebody who is not very sharp on pottery, if you test me, I'll tell you immediately this is iron one. Why will I say to you this? Because of this vessel over here. Where is it? Because of this one and because of this one. But if I don't pay attention, I look at the others, they look late bones. So the material culture is still late bones. Wait a minute. Wait 50 more, no, 30 years more, and the whole thing will turn around. And in the beginning of the Iron 2A, in the late 10th century, a new tradition will be introduced at Megiddo. The tradition of red burnish and red sleep and so on of the Iron 2. But this is still the tradition of the middle bones. And the same holds true for the entire package of material culture, as you can see over here. The flint industry continues the traditions of before. The copper industry continues. I mean, we have just 2 years ago published a big article in JNES about this. The jewelry continues the tradition. Everything, I mean, gold jewelry continues the tradition of the second millennium. The city of the late Iron One is typical second millennium city in the north. The cult of the site continues. I mean, this is the temple of Megiddo. That was the tower temple that was probably built in the Middle Bronze Age, supposedly, continued to serve with certain differences in the late Bronze, and continued in the Iron One. This building, with walls which are like 5 meters, 4 meters wide, continued to serve for about 800 years. The same building. This can happen in a monumental building like this, without major destructions or some disturbances, but it continued. But the pottery from the floor, the latest floor in the building, is typical late Iron One. And also the small finds from this area are typical of the late Bronze Age. So even in cult practices, we are in a second millennium tradition. Not only that, if you want to add one more layer, it's like in GIS, you know, we're putting one layer on top of the other. So if you wish to put one more layer on top of this, the question is about the territorial disposition. And this is the territorial disposition of the Iron One, the late Iron One in the north. It is almost exactly like the one of the late Bronze Age. Had I needed to give you the territorial disposition in the north according to the Amarna period, what should I tell you? I would have told you Gat of Tagi, Megiddo of Biridia, Yokneam of Balu Mechir, those of you who know the Amarna letters, Achshaf in the north, Anacharatu, and possibly Rehov, except for Kinneret. And these are again the same cities which become important in the late Iron One. Just to give you an example, Anacharat in the eastern Lower Galilee, on the right central right-hand side, you know, is late Bronze and then full recovery, very prosperous in the Iron One. So also the territorial disposition, division into city-states, is the same as it used to be in the late Bronze Age at Megiddo, in the north. So the question is what happened exactly. This leads me to the question of the destruction. The destruction of Megiddo is a devastating event. And it is so devastating that the University of Chicago excavators noticed that. And they titled this city of Stratum 6 in their numbering, they titled it the Red Brick City. The red brick, because everything was red from the destruction. This is what you see also in the picture above, at least. A total devastation. Now, this devastation is known also from other sites. Yokneam is destroyed, Anaharat is destroyed, for instance, Kinneret comes to an end. And the question is, what happened exactly? Now, there have been different theories regarding this destruction. One theory said that this destruction is in the hands of King David. This is the traditional, united monarchy, big conquest of King David, and so on and so forth, from the beginning of research until Harrison from the University of Chicago in 2004, and some others. Then there were ideas regarding the campaign of Sheshonq the First, who mentions Sheshonq, the Egyptian Shishak, biblical Shishak, mentions Megiddo in his list on the wall of the Temple of Amun at Karnak. Then came Eric Klein and others with ideas regarding devastation in earthquake. In an earthquake. How can one decide between the two or three theories what to do? So the only way is to try to again verify the dates. So here is what Eliezer Pisetsky and me published already a few years ago. We assembled the information regarding all the destruction layers in the north. And we put them in a chart like this. And it is very easy to see there is now supportive evidence for some other sites that we are not dealing with one event. You can see that the event in blue is like almost 3 standard deviations from the event in blue, in red, which means that it is highly unlikely that we are dealing with the same event. Now, if we are not dealing with the same event, but with one event which happened maybe in the very late 11th century or maybe a little bit later, and then an event which happened later in the 10th century, if this is the situation, so then perhaps so then we can negate some of the possibilities. We can negate one military conquest. We can negate one earthquake. There is something more complex going on here. If we are dealing with a wave of destruction, that started sometimes in the 11th century and continued until, let's say, the middle or maybe the early second half of the 10th century. So we are dealing with a process here. And if we are dealing with the process, so then the only way for me to understand this process is the expansion of what I would call the highlanders into the lowland. I don't see really a wave. Somebody suggested a storm of earthquakes. I don't know about storms of earthquakes. I mean, this sounds to me too much from, I don't know, a Hollywood movie, horror movie or something like that. But I think that what we are seeing in fact the very beginning of expansion of the highlanders. I don't call them Israelites and Canaanites because they are from the same stock. So I better call them highlanders and lowlanders. And they live in different socioeconomic situations. These guys in the valley are living in city-states, and the guys in the highlands are living in villages, maybe also in a big city-state. I don't know. I have recently struggled a little bit with the situation in the highlands and suggested that there is some sort of a polity there in the Iron One, with the center at Shechem and the cult place at Shiloh and so on, in the Middle Iron One, whatever. But these guys are in a process of attempting to expand. Now, take this as no surprise, please. There's no surprise here, because we see the same situation in the Amarna period. The whole story of Labayo trying to expand to the valley, bringing trouble to Megiddo and other places, is the same. I mean, the highlands polity traditionally tried to, one polity, the central polity of the northern highlands, you can call it Shechem if you wish, tried to expand and take over polity in the valley, and the taking over of the polity in the valley is what? Is an establishment, a foundation of a territorial kingdom. What is a territorial kingdom? What is the difference between city-state and a territorial kingdom? The difference between a city-state and a territorial kingdom is that one city-state takes over two other city-states and becomes a territorial kingdom. For me, a territorial kingdom in the Levant is when highlands and lowlands are being ruled from usually the highlands over both areas. And this, in my opinion, is what we are seeing here. We are seeing the expansion of the highlanders, that is to say, in different language, the very first move in the direction of the rising of the Northern Kingdom in 1 or 2 or 3 decades from now, from this point. This is, in my opinion, what we see in the north, in the Iron One, at Megiddo. Maybe if you have questions, we can. Here it's better maybe to stop in the middle, because I will go to other topics. So if you have questions regarding these two issues that I have discussed, I'll be more than happy to answer. Yes?
You were referring before to the continuity of the city-state system in the lowlands. So the city-states in this system, do they have kind of an alliance, or is it just trade-based? Because to imagine the villages from the highlands coming down to the, again, powerful cities. How do they conquer this kind of ecosystem?
I don't know how they conquer. I can tell you that there is no evidence for alliance between city-states. This, maybe there was. I cannot show this in the material culture. So I really don't know the answer. But look, I mean, a city-state like this in the lowlands, if you look at information in the Amarna period, you know, and even, you know, in other sources, even in biblical sources regarding memories of Apiru activities, you know, that are still embedded in the Hebrew Bible and here and there. I mean, 200-300 strong people could have taken a city like this. I don't think that you need thousands of people. The question is, of course, whether this was done in an organized way, let's say by a Shechem polity. I'm not sure about it. Why am I saying this? I'm kind of hesitant to say this. And why? Because when I look at my pottery, and when I look at my radiocarbon dates for the highlands, pottery we have enough, radiocarbon not enough, unfortunately, but still telling something. I think that there was a disturbance in the highlands also, but a little bit before. In the maybe 50 years before. So it is more difficult. It would have been easier for me to put the blame on Shechem. But it is more complicated, because Shechem did not survive, in my opinion, until the late Iron One. So I need to look for somebody else. So from here on, your imagination is as good as mine. You know. But we are still in some sort of a dark spot here. I mean, I have my own ideas about it, but it's difficult to. I even put them forward, you know, in the Forgotten Kingdom, if you remember, in the book. But anyway, I mean, it's enough to say that what we are seeing here is the beginning of the expansion of the highlanders into the lowland. Yes.
Did you figure out the Philistine Pottery? Anything else on that?
No. Yes. There is a lot to say about it, but. When did we start now? What time was it?
3:30.
3:30. So I'm 45 minutes into. Okay, fine. So we have until 5.
Until 5.
Yeah. So I have half an hour before we open for. Maybe now we do the questions while we are going down the dates. What was it that you asked me? Yes, the Philistine Pottery. There's a lot to say. And yesterday in the airplane, you see, I'm working even in the airplanes. I mean, I must be crazy. So yesterday I proofread an article that I'm publishing in IJ now about, how did I call it? Philistine chronology updates. Because Megiddo is important to tell us about Philistine chronology, because it provides us now with the earliest, I will just say this. Megiddo provides the earliest possible dates right now for the appearance of the Bicom. bichrome family of the Philistine Pottery in around 1100 BC. Because before we had surprising results, because before we had results from Philistia for bichrome at Bet Shemesh and Tel Mikne with dates starting in the middle of the 11th century. So now we pull back at least half a century, and this is important. So Philistine pottery is important, but let's set it aside because it's a different story altogether. Yes, more.
Can I ask you a technical question on the destruction of the late bronze city? You gave us this table with the different time periods and 68% probability. If you were to add a second standard deviation in both ends, how much would the time period stretch? I'm trying to get a grasp for the precision of your estimates.
If you move to 95% to standard deviation, of course it will open more possibilities, definitely. But remember that we combine this with what we know about the pottery. So without the pottery, it would have been easier to attack us, I think, and rightly, on what you are saying is correct, that in 95% possibility, it would be more fuzzy, so to speak, to see this. But when I combine, this is what I'm doing always, I combine radiocarbon with the settlement situation. So to give you an example, which I think we discussed today at lunch, if I remember well, we are working now at Kiryat Yarim, and with Thomas Romer and Christophe Nicole, Collège de France, and so on. And we had a problem there of dating a monumental piece of architecture at the top of the site. And we did not have any other choice but to do it in optical stimulated luminescence. So the result that we got from the optical stimulated luminescence was somewhere between 1000 BC, maybe a little bit before 1040 to 750. So it gave us a plus minus of 150 years, something like that. So this is not good enough. However, I can see that at Kiryat Yarim, the site is important starting in the iron 2B. And the iron 2B doesn't start before 800. So it diminishes the possibility immediately. So this is my method. My method is always to look also immediately. Radiocarbon results are wonderful, but they have to be engaged into the bigger picture if we want to reach better precision. Because your question is absolutely proper.
Who are these Highlanders about whom you speak? This is Canaanite?
These are Canaanites who will soon become Israelites. These are Canaanites who will soon become ancient Israel.
And Megiddo is also a Canaanite town.
Yes, this is why I'm so reluctant of naming them Canaanites and Israelites. This is more, it depends always where you cut the line, you know. If you cut the line at 900, they are the same. They are Israel. If you cut the line at 1000, you can call these Canaanites and the Highlanders, I don't know what. It is a very tricky situation here of labels, because we are speaking about the indigenous population of the country one way or the other.
And where are you situating David with regard to the destruction of Megiddo?
Well, David is somewhere in the 10th century. I don't know exactly where, but somewhere in the 10th century.
Donc after.
Yeah, but taking out David from Megiddo is for other reasons, not only for radiocarbon. So but there is a question, of course, which has never been properly asked, in my opinion, is what is the earliest territorial formation that can be described as Israel? This is a big question, right? The earliest, I repeat, the earliest territorial formation that can be described as Israel. Either it can be described by us as Israel, or they call themselves Israel. These are two different questions. They could have called themselves Shechem, and we call them Israel. So this is a tricky question, of course. So I can detect territorial, I think I can detect safely a territorial formation in the highlands in the Middle Iron One, which means destroyed in the second half of the 11th century, radiocarbon dated. How to call it? That's the mystery. How did they call themselves? I don't know. This is an open question. Yes, Axel.
Well, I wouldn't call your polity in the 11th century highlands definitely not Israel, because I think the tradition that Solomon was painted as black as possible by the biblical tradition. The tradition that Saul nevertheless is the first king of Israel, I think is a very strong argument for the fact that he was the first big king of Israel. And in my chronology in the introduction to my commentary of Kings, I think Saul started around 980 and David maybe 970, 960. Whatever your Highland people at the end of the 11th century were, I don't think it was Saulite Israel. And my second problem is, my impression is that Megiddo 5b, 5a of course, is still in the Canaanite tradition.
No, I don't think so. I think I'll speak about it in a minute. We'll get back. I'll turn to it. About Saul, and the whole tradition, of the first king of Israel, it is open to discussion, and also the dates are open, and also even the date of the destruction of Megiddo is a little bit open. This is why I am not saying, it was Saul who did it. I'm reluctant to say this. This is why I make it vague, kind of, and I'm saying, the Highlanders. I don't know. We are here in a resolution which is impossible, in my opinion. It is too much. Our tools are not equipped to answer a resolution like this, in my opinion. Okay, so we continue now with the observations on Omride Megiddo, and here I have some breaking news for you from the excavation. So the story is well known. I just repeat the story, and then we go into a little bit more details because this is really fascinating. So the story is, what comes next. So the traditional way of looking at things, we all agree that the city of Chicago, University of Chicago excavation, Stratum 6, is Iron 1. On this we all agree. We do not agree about identifying them and, affiliating them and so on, but on the very fact that we are dealing with Iron 1, we all agree. So the next is the Iron 2A, okay? And Iron 2A, for Iga Eliadin, for instance, was 10th century Solomonic, as you remember, with the famous gate, the Solomonic Gate at Megiddo, and on top and then of course the story of the gates at Gezer and Hatzor and Megiddo, we all know about it, enough is enough. And then the two palaces at Megiddo, and they have become the symbol of Solomonic prosperity, Solomonic grandeur, Solomonic kingdom in the 10th century. But we know today that these monuments do not belong to the time of King Solomon for many reasons. I'm not going to go back now to the discussions in the 90s, enough is enough. But we know today, and I'll show you a little bit of radiocarbon in a minute, we know for sure today that we are dealing here with phases which are later than the time of Solomon. Any way you look at it, we are dealing here with monuments that were built in the 9th century. But still, how to understand them? What is going on here? What was the nature, if they are 9th century, the monuments, they represent the Omride kingdom, the Omride dynasty, because there were two phases of strength in the kingdom of Israel, the Omride dynasty, 40 years in the first half of the 9th century, and the later Nimshites, if you wish, Joash and Jeroboam II, between basically 800 and 740 something, the first half of the 8th century BC. So for the 9th century, what was exactly the process? We are not in a situation that they came with a loudspeaker and they say to the people of Megiddo, guys, evacuate, we are the Omrides, we want to build here a new city. This is not what happened, right? So there was a process here. What is the process? Or in other words, how does a lowland city become part of a highland-centered kingdom? What exactly happens here from the point of view of monuments, from the point of view of rulership, from the point of view of cult traditions, cult practice? How does it happen exactly? And also the shift in material culture, because here I'm answering you, Axel, I think the material culture is very different in the Iron 2A, which means introduction of a completely different set of pottery. We are into red slip and burnish and so on. Also different architecture. All these traditions disappear. And also, as you'll see later, a change to iron production and so on. I mean, there are in many aspects of material culture, maybe not in every single aspect, but in many aspects we are into a new age. So what exactly happened? So first of all, this is the palace. This is the palace that Yadin started excavating in the 60s on the right-hand side, lower picture, and we continued there in the year until the year 2004, if I remember well. In 2000, when you were there, we were excavating there, and we have now good evidence for this building, and also the radiocarbon is very clear. The better evidence for the iron 2A at Megiddo is not here, but is on the other side of the tail in area Q, where we have a good sequence of 3 phases of the iron 2A. And over there, when we look, we see the following. Look at the chart at the bottom. The early iron 2A, which means the pre-Palaces layer, is in the very end of the 10th century, around 900. And when the palaces are built, we are, as you can see over here at the bottom, we are already deep in the 9th century. So the palaces, of course, do not belong to Solomon, and this is shown also from a work that Eliezer Pisetsky and me published in Antiquity several years ago about an attempt, maybe a little bit too ambitious, maybe not, an ambitious attempt to date the entire Iron Age, radiocarbon-wise. So we assembled then, at that time, 150 almost samples, 230 determinations from almost 40 strata, from almost 20 sites, and put them together into a model. And as you can see, the iron 2A, the late iron 2A, falls in the 9th century. So the palaces cannot be from the 10th century. This has been shown already. So this is for the palaces. But what about the gates? The gates, this is an interesting question. And I must tell you now that there are moments that you all of a sudden acknowledge something and you say to yourself, how didn't I see it before? Well, what went wrong with me that I fell asleep, and not noticing things? Because the gates, for all sorts of reasons, if I go into details now, you are all lost, me too, included. But the gate was pushed by me to the 8th century. But this created a problem. The problem was that the problem was that there was this elaborate city with palaces in the Iron 2A in the 9th century without a gate. So there was a possibility to say that there is a lower gate at Megiddo that dates to the Iron 2A, and this was indeed something that had been suggested by several authorities. And then there was another problem, that the gate at Megiddo is of a certain type. There are parallels to this gate in other places. Most parallels date to the 9th century. So there was some sort of a problem again. So what to do with this? Here's a picture of the gate. So this is a picture from this summer, taken from a drone. Breaking news, the summer of 2018. So a year ago, the National Parks Authority people came to me and said to me, Israel, we wish to reconstruct the missing wing of the gate. Now pay attention, please. Here there is a gate. Here is one pier, chamber. Second pier, block chamber in Antiquity. Third pier, chamber, fourth pier. And then there was a tower here that is now destroyed. Exactly like this, we had another one. If you remember the pictures, I can go back very quickly. I want you to see this, just a minute. Please bear with me. Here, on the right hand side, up. This is the same building. But here you see the two wings, right and left, east and west. And in the picture that I showed you now, we see only the east wing. Why? Because the west wing had been removed by the University of Chicago in the 30s. So the Parks Authority come to me and they say, we want to reconstruct for the tourists the west wing. I say to them, great, I congratulate you. And then they turn to go. And then I said, I forgot to say something. What is it, Israel? I want my money. As usual. What do you mean? I said to them, you're not going to cover all these monuments before without salvage excavation. Forget it, no way. And the Antiquities Authority is not going to let you. And of course I will tell the authorities not to let you. So you better give me my money to excavate this place before you do this. No, I'm joking. We're doing it in a friendly basis, and they acknowledge that an excavation, salvage excavation, needs to be done here. So we submitted to them a proposal, and we told them, you give us workers, and you give us also salary for the area supervisors and a little bit more here and there, and we will do it for you. And at the end of the season, it's all yours to do whatever you wish, of course. So they agreed, and they gave us 15 workers to do this. I must say that I had a very interesting, this is just to tell you a story about, the workers. They gave us workers from the territories, from Tulkarem, Arab workers. And they were not very young. They were like in the 50s or so. And it was really a very interesting relationship that developed with them, because they noticed immediately that we treat them well, which means we treated them as our volunteers, which means we mixed them with the young people, and we gave them full respect and so on. And they gave us really wonderful work in exchange. You see how sometimes human relations is the whole thing, that you can establish really interesting relationships. So we had a very good experience with these workers this summer. And the excavation was highly successful and revealing. So, here's the situation. I will try to make it simple, but I'm not sure I will manage. So, there are 4 gates in this picture. Let's see. See how beautiful archaeology is? Konrad, don't you want to become an archaeologist?
Maybe it's a little late.
Not at all. I will take care of it.
Become a Bible scholar instead?
Why not? We can exchange. This is going to be interesting. So, look at it. There are 4 gates here. Where are we? Here. Here is a gate. Look at these blocks over here. Here, and here blocks again. And there is a chamber here. Okay? A big stone over here. This is a gate below the Solomonic quote-unquote gate. So there is 1, there's 2. Then there is another gate on top, over here, which in fact is divided into 2. Because I think, without going into details now, there are 2 gates here. So there are 4 gates, one on top of the other. You see, this is also the power of this site, amazing. 4 gates, one on top of the other. So we were interested mainly with the Solomonic Gate, 6-chamber gate, it's not Solomonic. However, the connections, the stratigraphic connections, have all been severed already. They were disconnected from the area around it. So there was nothing to do. There is still things to do, maybe next season, to work over here. But right now, over here. But not over here, there was nothing to do. So we said to ourselves, let's operate properly below and see what the consequences will be. So we excavated the gate below. Here's the gate below. You see the front of the gate, which means the blocks over here, very beautiful, with recesses. And over here, this is the passageway. So you go like this. And Here is one chamber and a threshold. And the gate, Solomonic, is on top of it. Now, for this gate had been known before. And the theory was that it is a gate of stratum 6, which is later on 1, which continued, now be careful with me, bear with me, which continued into stratum 5. So if this was stratum 5, it was possible to push the Solomonic Gate up. However, we discovered the following. We discovered this year that the pottery in the makeup of the floor of this gate, the latest is iron 1. Not only that, we discovered that, yes, we can see it here, that on top of the blocks, by the way, I cannot prevent myself from telling you, so I'm sorry, but pay attention, this is amazing archaeology. Look at this. Where are we? Look at this. What do you see here? What's this, you think? This is the top. The archaeology is always full of surprises. This is the flat top chopped off of the middle bronze brick fortification. And the iron 1 gate is built right on top of it with the late bronze not there anymore. Now, the Iron Age gate is here. Where are we? Here. These are the blocks. See that on top, you can see the big destruction, bricks in situ from the end of the Iron 1. This and the pottery evidence mean only one thing. That the gate was destroyed at the end of the Iron 1 and there was no gate here in the next stratum. So now we are even in a more problematic situation regarding the city of the palaces, because we don't have a replacement for the gate. So I am not going to go into too many details here. This is an article that we have already written since the end of the excavation in early August. In the last month we managed to write the article and we will publish it soon. We were also in a search for the floors that are associated with the different gates. And to make a long story short, I will just tell you that the beautiful gate that you see now, that had been associated with stratum 5 and Solomon, indeed belongs to stratum 5 but not to Solomon. So we are now rehabilitating Yadin on one hand, but rejecting him on the other hand. So Yadin was correct regarding this affiliation of the gate with stratum 5 with the iron 2A. He didn't know to say iron 2A because this knowledge was not there yet at his time. With the iron 2A, which means with the Omride city, but he dated it to the time of Solomon. So you see how complicated things are over here. But now, what's important is that we do have a beautiful, elaborate Oshlar construction for the Oshlar palaces. So it's the same kind of architecture for the city of stratum 5. I have 5 minutes, right? Maybe a little bit more. So another question regarding, so what do we have here, in fact? When one follows the development of Megiddo in the Iron 1, from the Iron 1 to the Iron 2. So in the beginning of the Iron 2A, any way you look at it, we are already into the Northern Kingdom. Any way you look at it. But what we see at Megiddo is a village. There's nothing, I mean, the pottery is changed, but there's a village, there's nothing significant about Megiddo becoming Israelite, if you wish, from the point of view of rulership. But this happens in the first half of the 9th century with the Omrides. Because then you can see how a central authority imposes itself on the village, which means they come, and then they do come with a loudspeaker. And they tell you, guys, family XYZ, out, we decided to build a palace here. So they plant 2 palaces into the village, and they plant an elaborate gate, and they make it an administrative center and representative of the rulership of the people sitting at Samaria in the highlands over the population of the lowlands from age. This is what's happening. It's the same population being imposed over, if I can say so, by the rulership that comes from the highlands on them. And they become, by that, Israelite, because now they belong to the territory of the northern kingdom. So they are Israel, any way you look at it. Now, there are very interesting things to say about the cult practices. Because when a rulership like this comes, what do they find there? What do they see there? They come to Megiddo and they see the cult of Megiddo. Very old age cult which starts in the 3rd millennium and continues with a temple that stands there for 8 centuries and so on. Now, a temple like this is a center of power. Whoever controls a temple like this controls the city because it controls the economy. He or she or they control the economy of the city. This is not good for a rulership that comes from Samaria. So there is a change, and the change is imposed in a very interesting situation and solution. So this is also something that we have recently published in ZDPV. You may have seen this. I love, the long term. So, this is the influence of Albrecht Alt on me, I suppose. You are going to speak about Alte Naaman. So, before you speak about Alte Naaman, I remind you that I was also influenced by Alt.
You will get Finkelstein out as well.
No, I will give Naaman great, I think that he's the father of the tribe, there's no question about it. We are not in the business of killing fathers of the tribes. So this is the influence through Nadav, of Alt, if you wish, to look at things in a long-term perspective. So here it is. If you remember, we are the focus of cult activity at Megiddo is in the southeastern sector, the eastern and southeastern sector of the site. This is the place where we have the temple of the Bronze Age, the big temple of the 2nd millennium BC. The big temple was destroyed when the city was destroyed. In the beginning of the 1000, maybe a little bit later, in the 10th century, I don't know for sure when, exactly to tell you. It depends what kind of manipulation you do with radiocarbon, But, and then, after a while, another temple is being built. But there is no break between them, because this is a picture that was taken, I think, in 2014. In 2016, we excavated, or 12 maybe. 2014, we excavated all this. And over here, we also have evidence for cult in the Iron One. And then after this was destroyed, there is evidence for commemoration of the cult. Over the destroyed temple, a standing stone was erected and stood there in the beginning of the Iron 2A. And then, a phase later, there is a new building which is also cult related, and it is a significant building. Look at it. It's a building which you can see, where are we? Over here. Starting from here to this over here, and then we continued excavating. We excavated also this later, and we have the closing somewhere over here. And it has 18 pillars in it. It is a very impressive building. 3 lines of 6 pillars each. And it is associated with cult objects. These are the objects, some of them, there are many more, that we published in the ZDPV article that come from this building. Now, this building is Iron 2A before the phase of the Omrides. It is radiocarbon dated around 900 BC, which means it is not exactly 5A4B in the terminology of Chicago. It is a phase before, because we see more phases in the Iron 2A at Megiddo. Now, look what happens. It's really interesting. So, at a certain moment, this building is there. And nearby, there is a domestic area. Nearby, I mean 20 meters away, where the University of Chicago excavated one of the palaces. And then in one go, we see the planting, the introduction of the palace into the domestic area, and the destruction of the temple. Not destruction in fire, decommissioning of the temple. And in the next phase, yes, even they took the altars and they buried them nearby. And in the next phase, the temple is no more. This building that used to be the temple is used for, you'll see in a minute, for metallurgical activity. So what happens now? Next phase in the history of Megiddo is Stratum 5A 4B of Chicago, is the late Iron 2A, the main phase of the late Iron 2A according to us. And then there is cult at Megiddo, but not anymore in a major building. Now the cult is being incorporated into an administrative center. So the Omrites are coming as a strong dynasty, and they say to the guys at Megiddo, guys, relax, now we are in charge. So we are building our palaces here, and you forget about your cult with your power. The power is now with us. So we have our administrative center, and one corner of the administration center will serve as a cult place. So there is a change at Megiddo from cult in major temple to cult in a corner of an administrative center. And this continues also in the Iron 2B. So this is the end of a central, if you wish, big temple at Megiddo, the transition to the period of the Omrites. Together with it, and I'll be done with a minute and we'll open this for discussion, together I want to share with you several more observations very quickly. Together we have connection to metallurgical activity, because when the building is decommissioned, there is a certain development of metallurgical activity next to it, and also the excavations of Gottlieb Schumacher in the beginning of the 20th century. He discovered the same kind of evidence nearby, 10 meters away, in the yellow rectangle on the right hand side. Here is the evidence, and the interesting thing, I am going to wrap it up and just summarize in a few words. The interesting thing is that what we see is that the most important is transition to iron, mainly in the Iron 2A. This is probably part also of state or kingdom monopoly over metallurgy, and it is also interesting to say that the transition from iron to bronze comes from the same workshops at Megiddo, not from specialized workshops, but from the same production of copper. Finally, I just want to say one more word, last word, and then we'll stop maybe, and this is about writing. And this it connects to what we said about the Persian period, if you wish, in a different and not so different way. Look at this map, which is really surprising, I mean, kind of mind-blowing almost, I would say. This is the distribution of early alphabetic inscriptions from the late Iron 2A. Everything which is known. This is from the article that was published by Benjamin Zass, my friend, and myself in Hebai in 2013. And what engages your eye immediately is the fact that the heartland of the Northern Kingdom is devoid of any evidence for writing. Now, of course, you can say that this is because of chance, and this is because of method, and this is because of not enough excavations. I mean, whatever. Yes, of course, I acknowledge all this. But still, it is surprising. Remember that there is excavation at Megiddo, and that there is also in the valley. There is excavation at Yokneam. There were excavations at Ta'anak. There were excavations at Jezreel. There were excavations at Samaria. These are big places and properly excavated, not with a single inscription of the Iron 2A. And this is really surprising. So, what's going on here? In the next phase, this will disappear, this strange map. Because in the next phase, in the early Iron 2B, we get immediately the Samaria Ostraka and Bet She'an Ostraka and so on. So this is going to change. And also at Megiddo and other places. Here and there are inscriptions. But not for the Iron 2A. What to do with it? So here we come to a point where Benjamin Zass and me are not exactly of the same opinion. And I'm mentioning this only as something to remember and contemplate about later, not that I have an answer, an ultimate answer. So on one hand, it shows lack of writing activity in the heartland of the Northern Kingdom. So Benjamin Zass says this is impossible. Why? Because at the time that the Northern Kingdom had a strong army that managed to go all the way up to Karkar in the north in 853 with a big army, and they are engaged in monumental architecture at Samaria, Jezreel, in Moab, in other places. How could they manage to do all this without one way or the other ability of producing documents? So he says, well, they were able to, they were probably writing on papyri. And the papyri do not survive. And he has another argument which comes, which, let's put it aside, strong arguments. My answer is that if there is a strong activity of literary activity on papyri, something must link to the other media of writing, such as ostraka, for instance. And here there is nothing. So this I leave with a question mark. Another interesting issue on which Benjamin and I are working right now, and this is also something really neat. I don't have a map for this here, but is the question of the rise of the Hebrew script, not language. So the Hebrew script, where does it appear? When you put the information that we have, proper information, what is in fact the important thing that Benjamin and I suggested? That we changed from all sorts of theories to facts on the ground, to dating the inscriptions according to assemblages that come with them, otherwise forgetting. So when you look at the places, the map of inscriptions written in Hebrew, the Hebrew script, again, they are all not in the heartland of the Northern Kingdom, but they are concentrated. It depends how you count. But if you count main cities with their hinterland, I suppose, if I remember well the percentage, 90% are in the territories of two important Iron 2A cities, the most important cities in the country in the Iron 2A. Rehov in the north and Gat in the south. And this is also something to think about. How exactly the Hebrew script emerged, whether the impact of the traditional big cities of the Bronze Age continuing into the Iron Age and becoming important centers in the Iron 2A, their impact on the development of Hebrew in the neighboring regions controlled by the Hebrew kingdoms. I think that this should be, yes, this we have one inscription, but Proto-Canaanite for Megiddo. This should be enough, I think, for today and for Megiddo. And now we have a few minutes for questions, and I'm all yours.
But first of all,
questions? Yes.
Could the remnants of the papyri be evidence microarchaeology? And could it be found in the administrative center in Megiddo, for
example? Look, I mean, I don't think that we can identify with these techniques papyri, not that I'm aware of. We can identify maybe ostraca that are not very clear, that have been eroded. And indeed, in the last several seasons at Megiddo, we have introduced techniques, methods of sampling pottery in order to do multispectral imaging of shards to check whether there are inscriptions that cannot be seen by the naked eye. This started with I don't know whether you are aware of it, we published this in BASO recently with a mistake in our work. We took multispectral images of all Arad ostraca. And we took a technician to do this. And one day the technician was apparently either too tired or ate a sandwich or was on the phone. I don't know what happened. He took one of the ostraca from Samaria and put it in the system in order to take a multispectral image the other way around, the wrong side, with the blank side in the face of the camera. He took a picture, and then I get an hysterical phone call in my office, come immediately. I go there, and on a piece of pottery that had nothing at all, I see 3 lines of an inscription that have been revealed by the multispectral imaging. When we saw this, we lost all our confidence, of course, and we said, oh my God, let's do the whole thing again from the beginning. The bad news is that we did the whole thing again and we found nothing. So this is also a very interesting lesson, the only inscription with the other side inscribed and not seen is the one that was tested by mistake. But because of this, we developed a system to suggest to archaeologists how to deal with sites which are supposed to have inscriptions. So at Kiryat Yarim, for instance, in Kiryat Yarim, we are dealing with 8th, 7th centuries in Judah. So we did this sample testing. Ethan Levy, who is now with me at Megiddo, did it at Megiddo in the lab. He did it, and we indeed managed to identify, I think, 2 ostraca by doing this. At Megiddo, we did also and failed. To show you that the problem is more complicated. So it's not exactly answering your question, but it strengthens the notion that the inscription situation at Megiddo until the 8th century is very problematic.
Have these 2 ostraca been published?
Not yet.
Not yet.
No, not yet. They are a few letters only.
If I understood you, you found old Jewish letters in Gad, but Gad was a Philistine.
In Gad, no, we are speaking about the early alphabet.
Yes.
So, and the distinction, we have a distinction between Philistine script and the Hebrew script is not very simple. But as far as we can distinguish, mainly specialists like Benjamin Zatz and others, so then we see that all the inscriptions which can be described as early Hebrew script, they come from the margins. This is what I'm saying.
I remember that there's this round altar in Megiddo, and it goes back to the Bronze Age, I think. But why is it you said that the gate, there were several layers of the gate through all the times? Why wasn't it that the cultic area was always in the same place?
The cult area was in the same, also the gates were in the same place, because for the gates it's a matter of topography. For the cult, it's a matter of tradition, it's a matter of continuity, it's a matter of, some people say because, of being in the east, having to do with sunrise, I don't know, all sorts of theories regarding this. But yes, all the temples of Megiddo are known from the early Bronze Age, in fact, if you wish, from the early Bronze 1, that is to say from the late 4th millennium BC. Let's say from 300 to 3200, 250, 300 BC until 900 BC, all the major buildings are in the same area of Megiddo, in the southeastern sector, not in other areas. Of course, we don't know about early bronze in other areas because we didn't get there, so you have to take this sampling, with a grain of salt, but still, there's something in it.
It's 5 o'clock. And I think it simply remains us to thank you. We are very grateful for these fabulous lectures, and it was simply great. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.